The information provided on lifeinterruptedradio.com is for educational purposes only.
Welcome, everyone, to the Autoimmune Show. I'm Sharon Saylor from SharonSaylor.com. And as always, it's my pleasure to be with you here again on another amazing episode. And once again, I'm so excited. And tonight we have a return guest, and I'm just always doing the happy dance when she's available. She's an absolute world globetrotter, and she's landed for a few minutes to share with us. Sarah Peyton is who's here, and she's the author of Your Resonant Self. And, you know, for the longest time, she and I, if you go back and see some of the other episodes she's been on, we've been sharing the importance of understanding specific emotions. We did the importance of understanding anger, and as one on how do we talk to ourselves, so many that we've done. And tonight, I'm going to talk about a topic with Sarah that I don't think many of us even think about. I mean, I know you'll know the word when I say it, but when we started talking about it, I had a completely different definition of the word than Sarah did. And I said, Sarah, we got to talk about this. Your definition is so profound. So tonight, Sarah and I are going to talk about the importance of disgust. Yes, disgust, I know. So you guys probably already know Sarah, so I'll get more into her bio later. But Sarah, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, Sharon, it's such a pleasure to be here with you again.
Oh, and I'm so thrilled that you were able to find some time for us between all your world travels and talking about the importance of how we talk to ourselves and how, and your book, Your Resonant Self, is just an amazing book. And I know it's flying off the shelves, and I know you're headed out again really soon. So thanks for taking the time to be on here. Let's talk about the word disgust, because when you and I chatted about this, I had a completely different definition. And then when you told me your definition, it resonated at a much more intense level with me. So let's just first define the word.
Oh, thank you. The way that that I define disgust is as one of our primary emotions, and it's a primary emotion that tells us when our boundaries are being violated, or when our sense of morality is not being accorded with or not being honored. So disgust is hugely important to let us know in a way that we matter. And it's quite extraordinary to begin to come to this place of honoring our disgust. I notice that when we're in just kind of day-to-day conversations with people and somebody says, well, I'm disgusted, or I feel disgust, or I feel a nausea, it's like the whole everybody will try to change the course of the conversation in order to be able to support this person who's having a reaction, to be able to not have that reaction, because of course it is so visceral. The experience of disgust actually raises our internal torso body temperature by 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a viscerally felt emotion, but it also goes up from the body, up through the brainstem, through the amygdala, and has a track like the other emotions. It has a track that it travels on, sort of as if we had bus routes in our head. And with different emotions, we're riding on our different bus routes. So we have a bus route for disgust, and it's an important emotion, but it's one that we mostly try to avoid rather than saying, what is the wisdom that my disgust is bringing me?
Now, I need a little bit more clarification, because for me, disgust, yes, it's visceral. But when you said someone maybe is like pushing your boundaries and you're having to stand your ground or any of those sorts of things, I guess my mind would have thought that I was running the anger track, but you're telling me it's more of a disgust bus stop.
Yeah. Well, we did talk the last time we were together, we were talking about the surprising life-serving capacity of rage. And indeed, rage does let us know, yes, my boundaries have been crashed through. And with disgust, it's like we're in a different exploration. There's an exploration that's more about kind of integrity rather than safety.
Okay, because that I do feel violated when someone's pushing my boundaries and not seeing that they keep on pushing. Even maybe I'm giving some nonverbal clues that, hey, maybe the eyebrows going up, something's happening that I'm hoping they're going to see the nonverbal clues, and they're not. So yes, I understand what you're saying now, because
Yeah.
that does feel like a violation and an intrusion on my values.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we do is that we as humans use disgust in ways that are really intense. Some of the ways that we use disgust are things that we might not feel very good about. If we're trying to mobilize a population to go to war against another population, for example, we'll use rhetoric that's about how the other people are animals of some kind, or that they're insects of some kind, they're lice or they're vermin. This is the kind of propaganda language that has traditionally been used by governments when they want to go to war against another country. So if you look at the propaganda from World War II or the propaganda from World War I, you see these big posters where they're taking pictures of the people's, whoever the enemy is, and and implying that they're somehow not human, and especially often implying that they are like rats or vermin or insects, or that there's this real association that the propagandists are working with to bring out our natural capacity for disgust, that helps us to write off other groups of people as not even being human. And of course, one of the ways that we most often experience disgust, especially when we're struggling with health issues, is we most often experience disgust as self-disgust. This is one of the things that I run into most often when I'm working with folks who want to kind of reclaim their brain and make it a good place to live. One of the things they have to work with is their own tendency to feel disgust about their own being, their own body, their own health, and um, and this also is something that we've most often been taught, rather than it being a true expression, of the kind of what we get from life itself. Each of us is exactly right. Our bodies are right, and any struggles that we have with equilibrium and balance and health are honorable struggles. There's no way that anybody's body or body fluids are disgusting, but we can carry that as an internal message from an external world that turns away often from any kind of a perception of weakness, any kind of a perception of absolute invulnerability. That's kind of our standard of health and well-being. The totally invulnerable lone hero who's out to not have any relational connections and to save the world. And they get hit.
Well, what's interesting to me is when you were saying that about the self-disgust, a time came up and I was flashing back to the early part of the diagnosis where things in my body were more out of control, and I was trying to stabilize it. And now we're into the optimize, so that's a woohoo. But
Oh
I'm
yeah.
thinking back to that time where I would catch myself apologizing to some healthcare worker for something that my body just did.
Right.
And I was so, I'm thinking about it now. I'm not sure I would have put the words on it until your definition, but I was disgusted that how dare my body do that when that healthcare worker did that.
Right, exactly. And how dare this body bleed, How dare this body have diarrhea? How dare this body, do all of the things that bodies do? How dare this body throw up? We as we heal, we move into a warmer and warmer relationship with ourself and with our bodies, and and with our with our energy levels as well, because people will often have like this disgust level for what their bodies do, but they'll also have a disgust for things that seem vulnerable. So if we cry, sometimes people will experience self-disgust, or if we're scared, people will have disgust for themselves. And it's quite a thing to try to live with. It's really sort of an unlivable relationship to have this experience of holding ourselves with disgust. One of the interesting things about disgust is it doesn't easily respond to empathy. So if somebody is having self-disgust, it's very difficult to be able to kind of work directly with that emotion, the way you and I have talked about working directly with anger, or working directly with sadness, or working directly with fear. So one of the things that I recommend when we begin to try to use this language-based resonant response about feelings with disgust is that people imagine that it turned into a mat, that they turn their disgust into a mat that's lying all around them, and then they pick up the edge of the mat and they look underneath it.
Oh, what a great metaphor.
Yeah, yeah. So if somebody has self-disgust, like if I have self-disgust for the ways in which my health is a little rocky, and if I'm like, okay, let me find that disgust, and I have chronic skin stuff that I work with all the time, severely limits my diet. And so if I kind of feel into the way in which I turn away from myself, and I'm not fully warm and resonant with myself there. So the first thing I do is I feel my disgust, and then I allow it to kind of become as big as it is, stretching out around me. And then I pick it up and I look underneath. And underneath right now, as I'm kind of tuning into this, I find helplessness and sorrow and worry. And I can also find this sense, it almost brings tears to my eyes, a sense of the gap between what I want to be able to understand and know about myself and what I do know about myself. You know, that there are mysteries with our health where we're always trying to figure out, what can I eat, how much exercise, how much sleep, what brings the optimum state, is the optimization. And then there's like this space between what I know and what I wish I know, that I wish that I had all the answers for myself to be able to do self-care. So there's such a complexity. If we begin to notice our disgust and then look underneath it, it can be so complex.
It does sound very complex, and I'm just thinking out loud here. One of the things that I just briefly touched on with first is when we brought it up, I'm not sure I would have labeled a lot of these things as disgust, but now that you're talking about them, I'm like, for sure, that makes perfect sense. And to me, I'm thinking of them, going back to the time I just mentioned, that multiple times I've apologized to people for things that in reality I had no control over, really. I mean, it just happened, whatever that was. And that must have been disgust, I mean, to me, that I was like, and I'm thinking, I guess I would have put the word anger on it. I'm going back to that. Can we use that wording that you were so wise and just changed my life with that? You had said in one of our shows about anger, I'm angry at, or are you angry that? And I find that I'm wondering, I just feel like putting, am I disgusted at, or am I disgusted that?
Oh, beautiful, beautiful inquiry. Yeah.
Would that work for help me? Because I'm just having a tough time wrapping my head around the label disgust for some reason.
Right. I wonder if it would be, if the differentiation we might make with disgust might be a bit like this. Disgust at the self-disgust covers grief and helplessness. Most often, that's what we find. Sometimes horror. So the differentiation might be disgust with self versus disgust with so much emotion that we can't digest it. So disgust with self versus disgust with undigestible emotion.
Undigestible emotion. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Boy, that encompasses a lot when you're pronounced with a medical condition that is shocking, and they'll give you the stats of everything that's
Right,
going
right,
wrong.
right.
Very different type of diagnosis than when you get something as, a couple of aspirin in 10 days, you'll be fine. Wow.
Right, exactly.
Emotion. That is powerful. We need to take a quick commercial break, and I'm going to ponder that, because to me, that is one of the many beautiful things about Sarah. She always leaves me just in profound amazement and pondering, which then breaks through to these amazing breakthroughs for myself. So that's why I love having her on. But Sarah, I'm thinking back to my childhood, and also my grandkids now are bringing this to my conscious awareness. They're disgusted at everything. Or they do something disgusting, and they think it's funny, and then they get disgusted. Or I mean, it's funny how kids they find some humor in disgust, and they find some disgust in disgust, and sometimes they just like being disgusting, and other times it's an interesting thing in childhood. And then I'm thinking now, see, they're still young and still in that phase of where some of the disgusting is fun to be disgusting. I'm curious, what happens as we age? Because obviously I'm thinking back to my teen years, and I developed a whole new relationship with that word as I
Yeah,
grew.
yeah. Thank you for pointing out this wonderful connection between disgust and play in childhood. It's
They'll even say it's disgusting and be laughing. I mean, but
yeah,
obviously somewhere along the lines, my view of the word changed as I
yeah.
grew.
Yeah, and we are changed as we grow. One of the interesting things to think about is the way that disgust is protective for children. That when we're little, we have a reactivity to body fluids and to and to ideas about people kissing each other and, oh my God, they touch tongues, ooh, ooh, ooh. and
Boy
and then
germs, girl germs, whatever the words are,
that's right, yeah, yeah.
although they
And
act with disgust.
and it makes children laugh so much. But then we grow, and the hormones, the reproductive hormones start to flow, and we start to get interested in partners, and it becomes less disgusting, the idea of exchanging body fluids, for goodness sake. And so we can see this way that disgust is truly protective for children, that allows them to stay at a distance from sexuality until their bodies are ready to move into sexuality. And some of us have an experience of having more desire sexually, and some of us have an experience of not having much sexual desire at all. It's kind of like I'm like being able to say I'm asexual. It's just not something that's important to me. But what is important to everybody is that the movement of these hormones takes us from childhood into adulthood. And we're moved from being a part of our family of origin to finding and creating our adult lives. And these hormones of sexuality are the very hormones that move us into our authentic self. So the movement into the authentic self is really kind of, in a way, about a sacred, untouchable core of being, which is ours by birthright, and which we grow into, which has a natural unfolding. And so there's kind of this beauty as we hold that the sweetness of little kids playing with disgust and watching that change, that transformation of disgust into the sexuality, in, if that's important, into most importantly the authentic being, the authentic self. This is very important, because there are some ways that our society takes away our healthy appreciation for disgust. That little
Oh,
children,
you
yeah,
didn't say that. I was going to say it's somewhere along the line. It's like disgust gets stuck somehow. I mean,
hmm
whether it's society putting something on us, a particular culture we belong to or group we belong to, sort of places that on us or changes our view of disgust, besides just our awakening into our authentic self. I'm thinking at a certain point, at a certain age, there are a lot of, I get the word comes to me, maybe it's not the right word, please correct me, but kind of shame and blame type things of where disgust gets laid on us. So
Indeed.
I guess, are they related?
I think they are. I think there's a way that that in our world there's often a kind of a you know how the media emphasizes beauty more than anything else. You know that the and that that people say like that the camera adds 10 pounds to people, that the more slender a model is, the more likely she is to be hired and the more likely she is to become a supermodel. There's like this encouragement of almost a starvation of humans in service of ideals of beauty that can take over and are and in this kind of external oppressive ideas about how people are supposed to look, both men and women, um, we we almost lose. It's almost like our healthy disgust gets turned against us, which is something that's happening in the first part of the show where we were talking about propaganda. That's the media, that's the governments taking our healthy disgust and kind of using it as a leverage point to make other groups of people not human anymore. And then the way that everything needs to be a market, something in the marketplace, and how we use sexuality and beauty to sell products, then again it's like our own healthy disgust is being turned against us, and we're all of a sudden living in bodies that we have a sense aren't the right body somehow, when once again here we are, this is a body we have, this body is talking to us about our journey through this lifetime. And for those of us who have any kind of nausea that accompanies any kind of medical condition, it's very interesting to begin to ask the question, what has been indigestible?
Wow. Okay. So that is as interesting as what we were pondering just before the commercial break. What has been indigestible?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Now, I'm not talking just about nausea. Can I go a little further and say
Sure.
things like IBS, irritable bowel
Sure.
syndrome,
Yeah.
leaky gut, Crohn's? Those are all sort of in the digestive tract.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
There.
And there's so much research about how trauma and trapped emotions really do physical changes to the body.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what is it like if we experience disgust to say to our bodies, I honor your disgust. I'm sure there's something here that is indigestible. Let's just take a moment and acknowledge all of the indigestible things that have happened. Maybe the deaths of people we love, maybe the socioeconomic conditions of our family, or the environmental impact of different toxins, the way that the world is being, the way we're paving over nature. There's so many levels, for bodies of indigestibility that can be acknowledged. Indigestibility of this is very important for digestion, to acknowledge the link between attachment and digestion. That the way that we're fed becomes the way that we feed ourselves. So the way that a baby is nursed, is the baby nursed sort of like, okay, it's 1:30 now, and the baby has a bottle due at 1:45, and then the baby should drink 8 ounces, and then the baby should go to sleep. It's like this is one way that babies are fed. They're fed by a schedule. They're fed by an idea of exactly how much they should be taking in. And that's one kind of attachment. That's an attachment where the person says, okay, my body is like a machine that needs to have 7 gallons of gas every 360 miles, and which is very different from being with a baby and feeding a baby with delight, so that there's a sense of like wonder that the baby exists, and happiness to get to feed the baby and contribute to life, and a warm curiosity about about when the baby would like to eat, and a warm curiosity about how much the baby would like to nurse. So that there's this and in this case, when we've been received in this way and nourished in this way, we carry our own bodies through space in this way. We're like, okay, what does Sarah's body need now? What would Sarah's body enjoy? Is Sarah's body hungry now? And how much would Sarah like? Instead of, the clean plate club, which is not not very
A foreign country club.
is you have a job and you're supposed to get all of that food that is on the plate into your stomach within the amount of time that has been allotted for this, What
Wow,
is it?
I had never considered that. Now, if that's really resonating with someone, um, and they're going, this sounds like it could get much deeper in the exploration of understanding. If we're going, well, Sharon, I really don't know what my relationship with disgust is, but wow, I had no clue that it just even maybe the schedule we had as a baby and a child. As we begin to explore some of these things about our past, what are some tips that you have that someone, I know you always have beautiful language, what are some tips that you have that people could go, oh, okay, now I've uncovered, I was a regimented schedule baby feeder. How do I reprogram that? Is that
Mhm.
reprogrammable?
Yes, I believe it is. I believe that as we begin to recognize that, then we can start to experience something different. And the honoring of disgust becomes an important component to being able to even tell that we're full, because there's the sensation of fullness has it's on the gradation of the same area of our body that's revealing our disgust sensations to us. The stomach, the sense of the stomach, and the sensors in the stomach are what's giving us our disgust sensation and our disgust feeling. And this is the same area that needs to let us know, okay, that's enough. I've had enough food. Any more, and it will become more than I need. It will become indigestible. So there's a starting, an awakening of listening that comes as we begin to tune in to our own capacity to know when we've had enough and to know what will be too much for us. So there's one starting point, is this careful listening. And another is, as always, what I'm longing for is for each of us to begin to feel delight about our own existence. And if we have delight in our own existence, then we have curiosity about what might really nourish our bodies. Are we longing for salmon and peas? Or would we much prefer to have some boiled beets and a little bit of quinoa? Or would we love to have, a uh, a soup, a winter vegetable soup that's warm and nourishing?
Nah, chocolate strawberries.
Chocolate strawberries are talking to you. Your body's saying, I long for the sweetness and the tartness and the juiciness and the crispness and the toothsomeness of this beautiful dish.
Well, I want to pause here and take one more quick commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to say what actually came into my mind with the chocolate strawberries. And a lot of the things we've been talking about are actual physical sensations. And Sarah, when we were talking about the different kinds of foods and digestion and everything, and I popped out there with chocolate strawberries, I want to bring in this idea of maybe disgust with ourselves at an action level or emotional level. And by that, I mean, I have such fond memories of chocolate strawberries. It isn't so much the sensation of the taste of the chocolate or the sensation of the lusciousness of the savoring of the strawberry. Other than every time I've had them, it's been a really joyous, remarkable time.
Oh.
And I wanted to, so we've talked a little bit about the body, and now I'm thinking about emotions. Like sometimes you can be disgusted with yourself because you think you let your friend down. They're in grief and you didn't respond appropriately. Or there's some disgust around, I don't know if those are called emotions, but there's disgust around some actions that didn't happen. Not so much the physical body, like you're unhappy that you've gained weight because you're on prednisone or something like that, but actually some action that you had some more control over. Perhaps you could have maybe made a different choice.
Right. So we're starting to explore some moral disgust and the ways that we can be put into positions or experience life and not meet our own needs for integrity. That there's something very meaningful to us about being responsive to our friends, that this really gives us a sense of satisfaction. And when, for example, the energy drops, we're often left with that spoon idea of like, how many spoons do I have and what will I use them for? And sometimes folks get dropped. That's one way folks get dropped. Another way is just through distraction or some kind of paralysis can also be at the root of these sorts of things. And then we'll have this moral disgust with ourselves. And here we can ask this question: what is indigestible again? How are we having trouble metabolizing our own being in the world? Can we have compassion for what we actually do, for what our actual level of energy and capacity is? Or do we always want ourselves to do a little bit more? Is there always a continuing self-disgust because we never quite meet our own standards for perfection? I was working with a woman recently, and she said, I'm feeling so much disgust for myself. I should have been making food for everyone. The house should be clean. Everything should be done. And she said, if I were my mother, you would all have a 7-layer cake, and everything would be spotless. And here we have, you know. We have ourselves with entirely different lives than our mothers had, and yet we long to be able to do what they did, or we long to be able to live into a Martha Stewart image of what could be possible, forgetting completely that Martha Stewart had paid help for everything that was happening in her world.
For sure. Well,
Yeah.
you bring up an interesting point. Is like comparing ourselves to impossible standards, and nowadays maybe not so much reflecting back, but social media. Goodness sakes, how many times everything you see from friends or colleagues or whatever, they're draped over the expensive car, or they got the Mai Tai with the sunset, and the impossible standards of what, maybe how come I'm not, as successful or whatever. Gosh, this is just, besides the moral dilemma of perhaps me slipping and not responding with a value that I hold dear in the appropriate way. Here again, we're at sort of these external forces making us feel like we're not living up to something that should be lived up to.
Right. And we can often have, in the past we've talked a little bit about unconscious contracts. We can have unconscious contracts that are connected with disgust. I, Sarah, solemnly swear to my essential self that I will have disgust for Sarah when she falls short of the goals and intentions that I have set for her in order to never let her off the hook, so that she never stops trying, so that we can preserve some hope of moments of perfection, no matter the cost to myself.
Wow, that's deep. And you know what comes up for me is these old, I assume that we still hear them a lot, but these old tales of the hero, who pulls themselves up by the bootstraps. And if you were just a little more willpower, Sharon, or a little more resilience, or a little more grit,
Right,
I'm
right.
thinking, oh my gosh, all these
Yeah.
internal and external stories we're telling ourselves. So let's say that contract really resonated with people. Instead of Sarah, they heard Sharon or Susan or Jim or John or whatever. What are some ways we can switch that contract? And we have a whole hour on these sacred contracts. Check back at understandingautoimmune.com and find that, because that is also an awesome, awesome opportunity. But let's quickly just go over some ways that if we're like, oh my gosh, Sarah, that contract just, wow. What are some ways that we can switch that up?
One of the best ways is to make it explicit, first of all, to name it just as I did. And then you'll notice that I made that contract with myself. And so when we make these contracts with ourselves, we get to check in with ourselves, because there are always two parties to a contract. So here's the part of me that made the contract to the part of me that is receiving the contract. We get to say, Sarah, did you hear the vow that Sarah made to you? And then I go, yes, I do hear the vow. That is a very, very painful and energy-consuming vow. I don't think that's a good idea. And then we can say, would you release this contract? And then Sarah can say to herself, Sarah, I release you from this contract and I revoke this vow. And instead of the vow to always be disgusted with yourself for never quite reaching your own standards, I give you my blessing to celebrate the things that Sarah does do and to enjoy the heck out of them, and to um, lean into self-trust and being with and helping Sarah negotiate this life, which is very different. Now, if that is too far a stretch for some of us, we can do a partial release of the vow, which would sound more like this. Well, that's a pretty good vow because I don't want to give up on being perfect. So I tentatively release part of this vow in order to let Sarah explore what it would be like to live without disgust, just to see what it's like to not use that particular stick to beat herself with. What would it be like to live with a little acknowledgement and respect for Sarah instead of disgust? I will try it out. So there are two possibilities.
Now, let's say we choose the second there, the tentative,
Mm-hmm.
and we're very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Then do we go on to say, hey, Sarah, that worked? What's the next conversation when we say, okay, that I'm still here?
The earth has not opened and swallowed me.
So how would we, when we're celebrating that, like, well, that was okay. Then
Mm-hmm.
what's the next step? Do we release it completely, or do we give ourselves a
Well,
little bit more permission?
well, my experience with this unconscious contract work is that we come up against whatever's most painful to us. And then we do the release the contract, and then we're on to the next thing, and we live a little bit into it, and then we discover what is the next most painful thing. The next most painful thing may not be disgust. The next most painful thing may be that we constantly want to control what our 20-year-old son does and to make him, straighten up and fly right. That may become the most important thing, the thing that we find we're most obsessing over. The vows, the contract work, lets us kind of work with whatever our default mode network is being most obsessive about. So my tendency is to follow the body on this, and if it's knocking at the door for more release of disgust vows, then to go there. But if something else is knocking on the door, then to follow that.
That's great advice. I find that advice really important, just to leave it alone.
Yeah.
I did not take a straight trajectory in my optimization out of autoimmune for sure. And I think that was critically important, that with your help as well as the rest of my team, to explore some of these things as they pop up.
Yeah.
One of those things that I've noticed, sort of as they say, the teacher will appear when you're ready, but sometimes the emotion will appear when you're ready, or the
Yeah,
feeling or
that's
the
so
incident will appear
true.
when you're ready.
And now that people know, now that our listeners know to begin to honor their disgust, then their disgust will begin to speak to them in new ways.
Now, let's talk about sort of the shadow side of this. What happens if you're saying, well, Sharon, okay, I'll deal with my disgust, but I'm really disgusted at XYZ for, I'll just use the word Joe because, or I'm really disgusted at Sam, Susan because. What if we're
Hmm.
like projecting disgust? Do you
Yeah.
see that happening? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. So here again, I think we can do something with our discuss digest kind of pairing here. And we can say when we have disgust about somebody else, what what is indigestible? What is it that we want to be true that's not true? What's happening? Like, do we want? Let's say we have a friend and we want them to get a job and they're not getting a job, they're just living in their parents' house. We may start to feel disgust for them, and we can ask this question: what am I not digesting? And this helps us to look under that mat again, and because we want to look under the mat, because we want to remember that our resonant language, our empathy support of disgust, not very effective. So we want to look under that mat and see, well, how is it? There's a helplessness again. There's helplessness and grief, and I'm finding under this mat of disgust in this imaginary situation also rage. So again, we're using the disgust to try to hold the undigestible. We're holding the feelings that are so great that that we cannot move them, we cannot metabolize them, we cannot move them through our body. And so if we begin to notice that and say, how is this too big for me? We may notice that we have a helpless love that's so huge that we don't even know what to do with it. We may notice that we have a terror for people's well-being that's underneath our disgust.
it's interesting you say terror, and one word that always comes to me is a misplaced concern for someone's safety. I
Mm.
always find that an interesting conversation. We probably don't have time for that, but I always find that also an interesting thing that sometimes appears under the mat when I'm peeking under the mat.
Yeah, a terror for someone's well-being and safety,
Yeah.
wanting the best for them. And
Or what we'll say, my version of the best for them. That's where I have to start sorting. What's mine is mine, and yours is yours, and theirs and theirs. I have to start doing the sorting of like, okay,
yeah,
whose
yeah.
version is this?
I love this as a definition of blasphemy. When we think we know, when we think if I were God, I would do this differently. This idea that that if I could design human brains, they would not be so they would not be taken out so severely by trauma. If I could design human nervous systems, they would not be so fragile. They would not be so impacted by pain. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, Sarah, believe it or not, when we get together, we're down to the last 6 minutes. I want you to share what's ever on your mind that hasn't been shared, and then
Oh,
also share with us how to get a hold of you and find out more about working with you.
oh, thank you, Sharon. I'm working more and more online, trying to reduce my carbon footprint somewhat since I'm such an itinerant traveler these days. Trying to figure out how to get this work, online more. So go to empathybrain.com to be able to check in on the monthly webinars. Just last night, I did a beautiful piece on the latest research on anxiety. So, and that, of course, is very important for maintaining health and well-being, is beginning to diffuse the intensity of anxiety that we may live with.
Oh, wow. We'll have to have you back for an anxiety chat. We just had Maria Fadiman on a little bit ago, who is a National Geographic explorer and a mycotoxin survivor and thriver, absolutely thriver, because she's out in the jungles of the middle of nowhere, even with the mycotoxin exposure problem. And she and I talked about, from the thriver perspective, from the perspective of someone who's been there, this idea of anxiety, and my body may be having crazy reactions, and my brain is sort of having crazy reactions to the body crazy reactions, but I'm not crazy. So,
right. Yes, that's beautiful.
We came up with that idea about this idea of what happens when you're diagnosed with something long-term and your body's learned that it could, in her case, mycotoxin exposures to certain molds could be threatening, and how the body can react. So we're going to have you back for anxiety for sure. And just in the last 4 minutes, what final thoughts can you share with people?
What I'd love is for all of us to walk away from this time together honoring our disgust, noticing those moments when we cannot digest what is here in front of us, and holding ourselves with warmth and comfort and acknowledgement and a little resonance for the enormity of life and what it throws at us, and how indigestible many of our days are. And just kind of being with ourselves with a lot of acknowledgement and care in the experience of today's world, in the experience of today's life.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Oh, my friend, I always adore you and adore that you come onto the show and share your wisdom with us, because all of our chats together have been profound in the community, the Courage Club community. Talks endlessly about a lot of the things they've learned from you on how to talk to themselves, how to become more comfortable within themselves and release things that they have been holding on to that no longer serve them. So everyone, that's Sarah Peyton. Get her book, Your Resonant Self. You can find it at all the local outlets as well as online. And her website is empathybrain.com. Isn't that right, Sarah?
That's exactly right. Yeah, okay. No spaces. Yeah.
I was worried that there might be the or something, but it's just empathybrain.com. You can find out more about Sarah, and consider joining the Courage Club. You can find out more about that at understandingautoimmune.com, right there on the homepage as well. Everyone, join me next week for another exciting episode. Have a great week, whatever your adventures. Enjoy.
The information provided on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, including the websites understandingautoimmune.com and lifeinterruptedradio.com, plus social media, is for educational purposes only. What you read, hear, and see on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, and its websites, and other media outlets is based on experience only. The information should never be used for any legal, diagnostic, or treatment purposes. Always seek sound legal, medical, and or professional advice regarding any problems, conditions, and any of the recommendations you see, hear, or read here on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio. You've been listening to Life Interrupted Radio. To learn more, listen to other shows, and gain free resources that can help empower your life, be sure to stop by lifeinterruptedradio.com.